know, it's better at the beginning.
And welcome, everyone. I'm John Green-Otero, and I'm here with my prestigious co-host,
Sarah Heinrich.
Nicole Harmon, and join us at La Mesa, where educators gather to discuss topics around STEM education and early childhood settings. Today, we're so excited to be joined by Nicole Harmon. She's Director Coach for the Shared Service Alliance here at Pre-K4SA. Nikki spent the first decade of her life growing up in Africa, where she developed a love of nature, especially birding. And she is currently pursuing her Texas Master Naturalist certification. Thank you so much for being here today, Nikki.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to everyone who's joining us virtually today. Thank you to Wayne for helping us moderate, and to the D. Howard Foundation, as always, for their support, creating the space here for us to sit down and talk. We encourage you to join the conversation via the chat function located at the bottom of your screen and selecting the raise hand icon from the reactions. Also available on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Today, we are talking about the nature of STEM. It's a very clever title.
Pun? Yeah. No pun intended.
Unintended. It's one of my favorite parts of each of our discussions every week, Sarah and I, is she's like, what about these topics? I'm like, what about saying it this way? Super fun. We have a really interesting connection to outdoor learning, or what we call nature-based learning, right? There's a lot of different ways in which we talk about it in the field. So I'd love to start us off with just you telling us a little bit about, where your love of nature-based and outdoor learning comes from.
It's funny. I was thinking about it on the way over here. I've always had this deep love and being in nature, or doing things in nature with my children. But it really goes back to the way that I grew up. I grew up first 10 years of my life overseas in Zambia, Africa, and we lived on 40 acres. Mm-hmm. And we didn't have climbers and playgrounds that I could run to down the street. It was just 40 acres of African nature that I could run out, and I spent hours out there all day long. I have these core memories I think of, like living in Africa, other than the typical things you think about, like seeing the animals and safari and stuff. But I think of the rainy season, and when we would have flood, lots of rain, and it would flood in the back area to the point where we could barely get over the bridge. But my brother and I, not having typical toys, the toys that we would have too would be sent from overseas from family members. We were making boats all day long for hours about who could have the boat the fastest. Why did yours go faster? Do I need a sail? What am I going to use to make mine? Can we make it down through the arrows or through the tunnels under the bridge? And even dramatic playouts. I didn't have even you see the mud kitchens right now. There was these big tree in the front yard, had these long flowers, and I remember picking them and filling them up with water, and we used those as our fancy cups, and we had made a little place for us to play in a little house. We called it Play and Kick the Can games we created with the stuff that we had. So I think that's where you think of today's children, and children are growing up inside. I feel like more so now than ever, and I was one of the children from that generation that grew up outside, and so I think that's where it all stemmed from. I want to see that. I think we owe that to the children. We need to take back that part of their childhood. And so I think that's where a lot of the passion comes from.
I love that. I mean, I didn't grow up in Africa, but a lot of your story mirrors how I think about my childhood. I lived in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, not on this big swath of land, but, I think about St. Croix, particularly in the U.S. Virgin Islands, where the island's 13 miles long. And it's one of those things where as you got older, you could literally walk it if you wanted to. And so we would just have free reign to sort of run amok as children across farmland, across, unfortunately in some instances, dilapidated houses because hurricanes would destroy them, right? Very little supervision. Mm-hmm. But so many opportunities, which you just articulated, for you to ask yourself just questions, for you to have curiosity really fostered, for you to 1,000 little experiments throughout the day, 1,000 little hypotheses being tested, very little adult supervision, right? But yeah, I think a lot about what, to the point you just made, what has been lost, and what I think we all want our children to be safe. And in that pursuit of safety, what have we lost? What have we lost by removing that free exploration, removing the opportunity for children to get bored outside? Yes. And so that sort of leads us to our question of the day, our lead-off question. So how do we, whether we're educators, whether we're parents, whether we are just people who care deeply about STEM education and nature-based education, how do we effectively take STEM learning outside nature? How do we recreate that connection for children, for families with the natural world?
And I've had to do some of that even just because I work with a lot of family childcare providers. So they're doing childcare in their homes and have just some of it's a cement backyard. Yeah. I'm like, what can I do to help bring some of that? And really, I think you have to start small. Give them some green space. You can have a garden. You can bring in natural items. I actually made partnerships with community members. Like there's a landscaper, when he trims a tree, he cuts down some pieces for me, and I have those. There's a person that I gives me tires. But you can start small. Just bring in those. They just need opportunities. Right. There is stuff out there. If you can go for a walk. If you don't have the nature right out there, I think of my nephews. We went for a walk every evening, and he comes home with pine cones, acorns, you name it. There's something. It's there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there is something to be said about. We found this in a lot of our conversations. Sarah and I have talked about a bunch of different topics that it seems great. Push back if you disagree with me, Sarah, but it seems like consistently it comes back to this space of the adult in the space reconnecting with the experience. Because to your point, if you just commit to saying, okay, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to take a walk, I'm going to bring my child, or even take a walk myself to just sort of see what I see, odds are you're going to look at the space a little differently when you apply the lens of what can be learned here, what can be gathered here. And too often, I'm speaking of myself, included, I have a 3-year-old, there's that hesitation, there's that inclination to say, whoa, wait. Don't touch that, don't do that. Versus, pick that up, throw that.
I see what happens.
What happens is, right. I love that. So there's something that I feel like has become a through line between all of our conversations around. It starts with the adult.
But you guys talked about some beautiful, having opportunities to really get into wilderness, to legitimate nature. And I had some of those experiences myself as a very young child, but we did most of my growing up in an urban space. And you would be surprised, especially with young children, how much nature is available, even in an urban space, when you think about it from a child lens. Because I think about the experiences that I had, again, it was the 80s, being an outdoor kid, constructive boredom, figuring things out on my own that I didn't necessarily have. There were lots of just concrete lots or a patch here and there of dirt and whatever was growing. But I think about the experiences that I had as a child. And when we look at those spaces and creating spaces, you have a backyard that's basically a concrete block, but you talked about you can still do a garden, which is true, but you think about the experiences that you had as a child and what were those core things, right? It was places to hide. You wanted plants with big leaves that you could be like, now this is a house or a cave. It was things to climb, right? It was things that you could pick up and play pretend with that were very open.
I think loose parks plays a
huge part.
And they're not expensive. That's the thing too. It doesn't have to be something that costs a ton of money either. It's so simple. You can go to the dollar store and find some,
You can go for a walk in your neighborhood.
Acorns and collect. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I feel like an old guy when I say what I'm about to say. Because it just comes across in my mind a little curmudgeon-y, right? Like, what do you say to someone who is like me, who has a young child, who knows that there are certain elements? We were joking before we started recording that while there's a lot of ways to look back and romanticize the outdoor space, we also made some questionable to give a concrete example to the audience is, I talked about how we had these big channels underneath the ground, these large pipes that would take rain runoffs to safely get it away from communities, out into either we had this aquifer or this quarry, right? And as a child, I had no idea that's what they were for. I just thought they were giant concrete tunnels underneath the ground that just were not only deeply interesting because you'd find lizards and frogs and all kinds of fun things in there, but they were perfectly sized for my height, so I could run straight down this thing. And I legitimately thought it was like I was a secret agent.
Never a concern for snakes or spiders. Or,
Not even that. Like I look back and think, not even concerned about the snakes or spiders, a myriad of things could have bit me and hurt me, but like a flashlight, right? And so what do you say to someone like me who would love to recreate the sense, all the positive elements, right? But of course, now we live in a world where we know too much.
Yeah.
And it's harder now for me to think about, how do I tell my son, I want you to go outside in the Texas heat, right?
Yeah.
And I want you to spend 4 hours. And I'm giving you zero instruction beyond that, right? Go spend 4 hours. I think of my sister, I think of my brother, I think of other people who have children or have children in their lives, and I just don't hear anyone talk about that kind of stuff. Now, because of our work, there's lots of really productive spaces where we are creating like micro experiences. Let's get started, right? Let's go do an experiment. That I see. But I guess this is my very long way to ask the question. It's like, how do you get someone like me to feel like I'm really able to recreate that magical space
in the world we live in today, which,
that's the question I have,
Yeah.
right? And I know there are programs that do it, but like, I want to think about access. I want to think about everyone in this regard. I don't want it to be something where like, yeah, if you can afford to send your child to some 6-week summer experience that facilitates that. But what about the rest of us? Like, how do we, maybe it's a community approach. Maybe it's a larger conversation like we talked about the Shared Service Alliance and thinking about.
I've actually had a conversation with one of the child development centers that I work with. She has a piece of land that she wants to be this, like, envisions it in the future of being this huge just playscape level. How we grew up, that children get to go there and spend a day and experience that in a way that they may not at home. So I think it is thinking bigger.
Yeah. I love that. I agree. I would love for that to be part of the conversation. And I'm curious because when recently we had a conference come through at Pre-K Pro Say, it was a nature-based conference, and it was lovely, but it always sort of feels like, sort of like we do at our centers. You go outside, you look at the playscape, and you think about what are the natural elements. And in that way, it's beautiful and wonderful. But I'm so glad to hear that some of our providers are thinking a little bit more ambitiously.
Yeah.
Right. Because if we're writing grants for hundreds of thousands of dollars at times, sometimes millions, why not come together and say, what could we do as a community asset?
Yeah, that was her vision, just to see kids coming there and spending a day. And it would be beautiful.
So cool.
Yes.
But I think we're uniquely blessed, San Antonio. And I know that there are other communities out there who share this resource where we have a very robust parks system, and it ranges from very curated spaces to very wild spaces. And I think about McAllister Park, and I think about spaces in Brackenridge, and I think about where you have opportunities where families who may not have in their neighborhood or their backyard those wild experiences where they can go inside the city limits, and it necessitates us adults sitting in the heat of the day or enduring the insects that children don't seem to notice, to be, responsible for our children. But that they have those opportunities if we're aware of them. And I think awareness is always a piece. And then, the opportunity to take advantage of them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I do think that there's this I found myself wondering, really, this is something that I'd love for our listeners to push back, because I know so much of what D. Howard Foundation is trying to do, as well as many other organizations, to think about the rural communities and how they are able to access a lot of these resources connected to STEM. But that's an interesting space where I kind of have a story that rural communities have privilege in this regard, where you have acreage and you have spaces and places, and it might be a little easier to spend time doing exactly what I'm talking about. Whereas a rural community, right, has to rely on the rural elements that exist, right? There are some lovely ones. I think you're absolutely right. San Antonio is very lucky to have not only a plethora of, every space I go to, I feel like I'm 5 minutes away from some kind of green space. So it is lovely, but there's something different, right? Again, romanticizing my child a little bit about the wilds of even a
True
rural
wilderness.
Yeah, growing up wild. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I meant urban. I said rural.
I followed.
I thought I figured what you. Yeah.
Well, great. So this is kind of an obvious question, but for those who are perhaps not as fortunate as us to have spent so much time outside, or from a younger generation who, like my nephew, would much rather sit in front of a screen or play video games or any number of things that does not involve the outside, what are some benefits to STEM learning outside?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is the engagement, because you're naturally curious. Nature is a landscape for curiosity, for observing, they're naturally doing these things. So you sit down and they're asking them these guiding questions. But I think the engagement level, the learning is applying because it's hands-on. It's applying to what they're doing. Something else I was going to say that was following that. But I think their health too. We can't lose sight of the mental health too, because I think that it's not necessarily like, but just being outside for children, I think is their mental health. I think of how I feel after I go for a walk or when I'm out birding and after a long week of work. I mean, and then just imagine what it does for the children to get outside every day, or what it does to them when they're not and they're inside all day, on those four walls, told to sit in a chair and, so it's right, let's do this. But
because there's so many benefits to your balance, your muscle development, your immune system, your mental health, that just being outside, being able to take your shoes off and walk in the dirt, to lift and pull and climb and explore, that does for you that being sedentary does not.
I think, and you develop too that appreciation for the nature around you. I didn't know there was a whole world of birds until I started going with my mom. This whole world was opened up, and if the children don't get the opportunity to participate or to see any of that, they're missing a whole world that they can explore. And so I think it may develop a lifelong learning or for conservation or appreciation, or you just don't know what those experiences will do. Yeah.
I think about it so much of our society's become so complex. Technology has pushed every generation to greater and greater layers of complexity. And one of the challenges of that, again, I sound like an old guy here, is that, even 50 years ago, if something broke, you could open it up and fix it. It's getting harder and harder, right? You hear mechanics talk all the time about how, again, 50 years ago, if a car broke down, you could open it up, find the piece that's broken. I can't tell you how many times I remember my father with his head in the engine going, my father wasn't necessarily an engineer, but he was an astute enough man that he basically understood, how a basic engine worked. And he could sort of walk down the line of a system and go, this is where it's broken. Replace that part, and the system would turn back on. Some pretty foundational STEM perspectives, right? And so I think about how challenging it is in this regard, but the opportunity it is for STEM learning out in a system that does have still some pretty tangible, graspable, like reciprocity of experiences, cause and effect relationships.
They're applying it to their right there.
Whereas some of the technological systems are much harder.
And you'll be surprised with the questions they ask. Like I can think of, like, there was a child playing with a very light log. I thought, well, why is the other log so heavy? And this one, it was, an old log versus a one that had been freshly cut that still had the water. Or, they're rolling pine cones or rocks down a slide or something. And they're like, well, how come yours rolled faster?
Right.
Well, they're naturally doing so many of these things if they're given the opportunity. So it's in the moment, it's just, and it's beautiful. I love to watch and be a part of it.
I love too. And I think it helps. I think you said this earlier around conservation stewardship, but I think there's just something fundamentally about helping children understand what is a human relationship to the world they live in. And as we think about the future of the world in terms of just how, our impact on it is becoming more recognizable. COVID was a great example of when humans sort of pulled back temporarily. We saw rebirth, regrowth, restoration naturally without us doing anything, simply by inactivity. And so I think that there's something to be said about really intentionally creating space.
It's interesting that you said that, because when did I get involved in birding? COVID.
Yeah.
I was forced to go out, and there was this whole world I
Yeah.
probably never would have, because I was in my own little bubble.
Nice.
But it's
But it's just, I think there are, for those of us who slowed down, right? Whether we were forced to or we chose to, I do think there's an opportunity there, because when I think about the benefits, I think about this question about the benefits of STEM, it echoes everything you both have just said. But I really, as I'm sure you both have heard me till your ears are sore, I think about the neurological benefits. I think about just how our neurological systems, our biological systems, evolved in natural systems. And so they are deeply, deeply benefited from being, once you're walking out in the sun, getting the vitamin D absorption, moving our bodies, getting close to water development. And what we're seeing, it's sort of compensating. Take our Ready Body Learning Minds program, which is a program that we developed in partnership with physical therapists here at Pre-K4SA to help children who were having gross motor delays, right? And so what they saw is that like the bodies are sort of changing based on how muscle groups aren't developing.
Yeah.
And we're seeing negative impacts later on in life. And so it's not this hypothetical, 200 years, 2,000 years, right? 1,000,000 years down the line, we'll see some impact. We're seeing changes to our biology in real time. And so I love how you brought some good examples of how you as an adult have already seen that pull, that drive, and its benefit to your life. Because I think that's back to my earlier point. I think it's something the adults in the lives of children really need to understand, so they can then center that for children. Children will do it on their own, but we create barriers.
yeah. And we have to make a point of it, I think, more now ever as adults and parents and teachers. Yeah.
And I think there's something to be said, because talking about an urban space, talking about the change in society where we have become, to some senses, almost even hyper aware of safety and security and things of that nature, that if we are not sending children out to free roam, that we have to be even more intentional about the opportunities that we curate for them, and the questions that we ask, and the challenges that we pose and encourage them to, and just there's a level of self-reflection, I think, as educators, as parents, that you have to undergo dealing with a different landscape from the landscape we grew up with.
I agree.
I think of my son last summer, inside, wanting to be inside. I'm like, nope, you have a friend over, you're not doing video games, you're gonna go outside. And we live kind of by a forest, and I'm like, I'm gonna sit out there and wait, because I didn't want them out there by themselves. Before I knew it, they had built like this whole like structure that they were trying to think, can we sleep in here? Can we? And they were out there for 2 hours. Mind you, 7th grade.
That's great.
Which I think I felt like as too, when we were younger, we played, I feel like till we were a lot older, as younger.
Oh yeah.
Does that make sense? You played like younger things at an older age.
Childhood lasted
Yes,
longer.
it did. And I think they grow up so much faster now, because I don't have some of them. I can remember playing with dolls and doing that in like 8th grade. And I'd rather keep that innocence and have him play that way than be,
Agreed. I left to college. My brother's 5 years older than me. I left to college, and so then we moved to 13. And as I left college, I'll never forget that he was like, "Oh, I want to play, action figures." Where you go? Yeah, that was his request. And so I agree with you. I think there is something that was lost. I think we try and push children really quickly out of childhood, which is interesting, because you look sort of in the past when children were working.
Yes,
there was this whole movement to give children their childhood back, right? And now we're sort of losing children again, but they're still technically children. Right? They're not going out to work. They're not going to, but somehow we've had to compete with technology in this way.
And they're so busy.
Well, they're busy, but it's not, it's different. It's a different kind of busy. Like the way they socialize is different. The way they engage in the world is different. It's been fascinating.
Wayne had a couple of questions for us. If you want to unmute yourself, Wayne, and
coincidentally, and I think Sarah, this may be one of the emails I sent you in the last week, coincidentally, but I was recently referred to Annenberg Foundation. So I've heard the name of the foundation, but I really didn't know anything about it. But so I looked it up. It's very impressive, and Mr. and Mrs. Annenberg made a lot of money, and I think they left $1 billion in an endowment for this foundation. And I think they had 3 kids, and each of the kids has picked a area of charity that community service that they're interested in, and receives funding to do this, support to do this from the foundation, among other things. But the reason I raise it is because one of the children, they're all adults, is interested in nature. They have a website called, it's easy to remember, explore.org. Basically, and they have all these amazing videos of nature on this website. And a lot of it is live cams, where they put live cams out in the wilderness, and like for bears, they do a lot with bears in Alaska, I think, and different things. And I was just wondering, thinking about it as you were talking, and I came from a small town growing up, and so I can relate to what you're saying. And my wife is from England, and she talks all the time about going outside and playing, and until it's dark. Well, it gets dark there much later than it gets dark here. It gets earlier, it gets light there earlier than here. And so we talk about that kind of stuff a lot, but that's no substitute for going outside and yourself. But I'm just wondering, with modern technology like that, is there a role in this teaching kids about nature to integrate the technology that exists, to show them, expose them to that they may not otherwise get a chance to see?
It's funny that you say that, because when you said about the live streaming, being the bird nerd that I am, and it's she's been all over the news, Jackie and Shadow, the bald eagles, because you can actually live stream into. I've watched 3 years where they have clutches of eggs and they hatch. But I know classrooms. My nephews, when they came to visit, they're 3 years old, and they heard me talking about, they're like, oh, and then Sunny and Gizmo, they knew the babies, and they could tell me of so many things about the eagles, because if there's an interest that a child has, you can definitely expand. I think you're expanding on their knowledge by showing them that, those videos of real life, and then questions come up. You can bring in literature or books about eagles, and there's definitely, I think, a space for it.
And we've definitely given up a certain level of experience in the natural world that I think that many of us are desperate to sort of like reclaim for our children or our grandchildren. But technology, from our STEM acronym, right, really has afforded us the opportunity to get a direct lens into what nature looks like in places beyond our immediate scope. And so if you are giving children the hands-on, real-life, day-to-day experiences in the nature that is available to you, you also have the opportunity to, in addition to like books and resources, this very direct tie-in to what is this herd of elephants doing in this one place? What are the animals in our Harburger Park doing on the land bridge? There are live cams on the land bridge here in San Antonio where you can see the animals crossing and sort of like follow what's going on and be directly attached to things that you wouldn't necessarily get firsthand experience with, because we have this great technology access now.
No, I think that's right. And I think that's one of the reasons why my mind didn't jump straight to that idea. I think technology has made the world smaller in some ways, right? Like when I grew up, I had to walk to a library I had to get a book to read about space, to read about dinosaurs, to read about. Now we have some of the most beautiful pictures I've ever seen of galaxies beyond like my comprehension. We have better pictures of the planets in the solar system than we've ever seen. We have so much new knowledge around not only the scope of the universe, but the depth of it, right? And so I absolutely think you're right. I think what's exciting is a responsible relationship between understanding the natural world, understanding science and STEM as the mechanisms by which we understand the world, the mechanisms by which we test theory and assumption and engage curiosity, and then the use of technology responsibly. And this back to sort of like, I think what we all would agree with, like, how do we develop scientists that are curious, but also responsible with their curiosity, right? And so it's every year that we invent new ways to understand the natural world at every scale, we create a new opportunity for a new scientist to be born, right? And I mean that in that concrete sense, but also in sort of that fun, fanciful sense of like a new science, right? A different kind of scientist to come into existence. And so I think thinking about ways to, I mean, the phone being such a powerful resource and that is almost ubiquitous, right? Almost every community has access to some kind of technology, whether it's at your local library or your school has access to it. And then that being a portal to everything from watching baby birds in real time hatch to seeing, even in this case, we're talking about theoretical representations of quasars, whatever. So I think it's a huge, huge opportunity for us. I think what's kind of an interesting thing is then now we have to ask ourselves, well, what do we do? Now that we have all this resource, because back when knowledge transference was so slow that now we have to kind of be a little bit more, not judgmental, but discerning. Thank you for the word. Which brings us kind of, unless you have another follow-up question.
I do have sort of a related question. One of the challenges that I've found in my limited experience here in San Antonio or anywhere, really, I believe, is there's a lot of the world out there that kids in Title I kids, I always get in trouble speaking, generally, and there are always exceptions, but I'm trying to get to the kids that need our help the most, shall I say, that they're limited in what they can be exposed to as far as nature. Let's just talk about nature because of lack of transportation. And when we were talking offline before the podcast began about a program that we did at the San Antonio airport, where kids, middle school kids, came out there for a day at the airport. We organized all kinds of events for them. Or one time the U.S. The Weather Service, whatever the technical correct name is, but has a program where they go around to 8 cities, different cities in the U.S. every year, and they do a whole show and tell about, the weather forecasting and what equipment is used. And they brought in all these airplanes and, that fly into hurricanes and stuff like that. And they were having a heck of a time getting school kids, their target audience, to come there. And they were referred to me and we helped them out. But years ago, I had a conversation with doing programming with the San Antonio Zoo to take the kids, and there may be some of that goes on now, but taking kids from those areas that might be your demographic target, Nikki, and going out to the zoo and they'll do a whole day of programming and seeing the birds and the Campbells and whatever. And then they have a school there in the summer, I believe it is, where
They've got year round now.
Yeah.
that's where they go to school. And so, or we have ranches around. There are just lots of things out there, while the practical thing may be to have to deal with these homeschool providers or whoever you deal with and take what is out their door and apply it in this context. Are there any programs in San Antonio that will take care of the transportation to transport these kids and take them to these different places? The school districts have buses. It just seems to me that that would be a good ancillary to exactly what you're talking about. I think what you're talking about is fantastic. And in fact, we're having our La Mesa STEAM, which is grades 3 to 12, on, I think it's September 3rd, a principal from Stapleton, Alabama, who's gotten all kinds of awards at his elementary school for gardens that they've planted and STEAM programming that they have outdoors at that school. And it's just coincidental that y'all are talking about birth to second grade, and we're picking up in 2 weeks on third through 12th. But are there programs available? And if not, does it make sense what I'm saying? And it's just a matter of working out the logistics. And thank you for the time. And thank you for what you're doing.
From a systems perspective, right? Like, I think what you're talking about, Wayne, is really that space where stakeholders, systems leaders, I mean, I think about the example that you brought at the onset of this, Nikki, about that one provider who's thinking about doing something a little bit more community-wide. It takes that kind of thinker, even if they don't have the resource, to begin to put forth and get momentum, right? Back when I was younger, we would call them collective impact, collective action organizations. Since then, I think that terminology's got a bit of a bad name because, you know, they became so ubiquitous, they became so popularized that people would join them and then they wouldn't get the results they wanted. So people started to stigmatize them. But the concept still exists. These, whether you want them through philanthropic organizations or through community organizations that just come together around, you know, ideas, I think there are people in the work doing that kind of thing. And I think the question becomes, how do we help either the philanthropic organizations, funders, people who are really dedicated to understanding or wanting to solve problems in the outdoor learning and STEM space to come together at given points in time and sit down with the communities that you're talking about, right? Whether they're rural communities or Title I communities or just children with access issues writ large, and say, here's the biggest barrier to my access to this experience. Because one of my favorite definitions of equity is access to excellence. That's it, access to excellence. And I think every child deserves access to some high quality, excellent experiences. And if, to your point, I have seen reports that say that transportation is an issue. I have seen things to say that some kind of resource is an issue because money often is the barrier. And technology sometimes is something that's really easy for big school districts to write funds for, get grants for, and but they also have a shelf life where eventually they get to end of life and then they get lost and then it's the next thing. Whereas experiences can be harder for big, you know, government programs to want to fund because it's harder to track where that experience, what metric that is connected to the experience is going to show the result. It's going to show the outcome that we want to see, that we can then say, well, these 40,000 children who had this experience 20 years later became engineers. I think that has hindered some of those things, but I think the heart of my response to you is, I think you're absolutely right. I think we just need more conversations about it. I think we need more people like us sitting down, which is why La Mesa exists, right? It's why we're here talking. Because often when you sit with people in the room, this is my own personal experience with collective action and collective impact programs. 99.9% of the time, it's a couple good, people who are sitting there and going, hey, here's the problem. And the other person going, I've got a solution. And then within that conversation, you've solved at least a problem for some children. And that's a win. But if we don't have the conversation, if we don't ask the good questions you just asked about, hey, is it transportation? Is it just the bus? Because Preview Force A has buses, and we're committed to our communities going out and doing all kinds of activities out, whether it's to learn San Antonio or to get exposed to different, outdoor learning or swim or right, any of these things that we see as a value. But it starts in the conversation space.
I think there's a awareness element to it as well, because to your question, Wayne, you asked, are there programs like that? And I can think of several off the top of my head. The Harburger Foundation buses children out to do nature experiences in their parks led by their education facilitators. The zoo has excellent programs. And I think one of the things that we sometimes struggle with as a community is the space of finding places for those micro opportunities, right? Because if you are a philanthropic foundation, you want to have as big of an impact as you can. And so you're targeting Title I school districts, you're targeting, and home care providers, family, child services, these smaller programs don't necessarily have the same flag to wave. It doesn't go as high up the flagpole. It doesn't get noticed quite as much. And so I think that our program, the conversations that we have, is a really unique opportunity to raise that awareness of how do we find spaces so that all of those micro groups can also have access.
That's a really good point. It makes me think about our chef program and our garden table program and how particularly challenging it is to get them access to the same, right? Because just the simplicity of saying we have 5 big centers. Mm-hmm. It's easy to get 5 deliveries to 5 centers. It's much, much harder to get 100 smaller deliveries to 100 small. That's a really good argument, Sarah. And I think it's something that I think technology is going to help, right? Every time I really got excited when curbside and all of these, I know it's funny, but when I see those kinds of things, my innovation brain goes, okay, so the marketplace found an opportunity to create a solution to this. And once that solution exists, I start to think, well, what other things could be born of that solution? And one of the conversations we had in the garden table space was, well, what if there was some kind of relationship with HEB, for example, where HEB had a separate hub of subsidized, produce. Yeah. All of a sudden, you don't need to design a system of delivery. It exists already, right? It's just a question of how do you ensure, to sort of Wayne's point and Sarah's point, how do you ensure that those philanthropic groups understand what the need is and can target their funds through a system that exists, which is why shared services are so powerful and all these other things. So it does present itself a really interesting advocacy. I really appreciate that, Sarah. I think that's right. So I always like to leave our conversations with things, I like ending things with action oriented. So we talked a lot about it. So I just love to sort of end our time talking a little bit about whether it's a family or an educator, looking to bring STEM learning into their classroom or into their home in relationship to nature. What would be your top tips and tricks for people, whether it's a material or activity, or what do you got?
I think I always say it's an opportunity, right? And they just need, it doesn't take that's why I always say it doesn't take, when I'm thinking of family childcare, you can put a bucket out there with sand. It's an invitation to play and explore. Sometimes it's just setting up to start small, build in those little pieces outside, whether it's a garden or you grow them inside and then take them. I always say the learning doesn't stop indoor, doesn't stop. The learning follows the children, whether you're connecting, you're out, something you can do outside. There's caterpillar condos, there's birding, there's little things you can start with. But I think it's just create those opportunities. just start small with the one, little activity and grow from there and follow the children's interest and lead and their questions. And that's going to lead to something else. Oh, I could add this. I could do this. Or
right.
And we think from a parent or educator perspective, I can't have a live animal because I don't have a glass terrarium to put it in.
Right.
But
or the cost to care for that animal.
You don't necessarily have to plan on keeping that animal for days and days and weeks. It could be we went outside and we brought in some roly-polies or a caterpillar in a plastic cup or a cardboard shoebox. I think it sits on us as the adults in the space to really be open to flexibility in our thinking, to follow the children's lead in their curiosity, to really pay attention to. I've noticed that when we are indoors, the children really like to building with blocks, or they really like to get out the counting bears and do things with them. And to think, okay, so what are things that I can easily do that replicate those kinds of experiences with a different material? So now I'm going to go and I'm going to get a variety of rocks. And I'm going to go and I'm just going to get a whole bunch of pebbles for us to use, or chunks of wood and leftover tree cookies and things of that nature. And it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive.
I guess what I love about it so much, I was thinking of watching children on their playground. They discovered a hole, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, and they had sticks, and they were like, well, let's build a bridge. And so they're like, well, how long does it have to be? And so then they were taking sticks and were like, this one's too short. And they found one that worked. And then they used that stick as the measurement. We're going to go find sticks this size.
That's smart.
And then they found one that had a little curve to it. And they tried, well, no, that doesn't, it doesn't work. So we need a straight one, but just that, and that happens naturally with simple. That's what I think is the beauty of it. And that we said roly-polies that triggered when I was a pre-K teacher. But they were picking up roly-polies all the time.
Right, all the time.
So we decided we were going to bring some inside. So they built, I had a roly-poly habitat in my classroom for at least a month. The director was like, okay, it's time to the hardscaping. But you think about the learning transferring from inside to outside. They were going home, coming back with, I read that roly-polies can eat this. Or they were planning how high it needed to be so the roly-polies wouldn't get out. They were learning, what can I put in there for them to eat, to hide, it was fascinating. You think of all the learning, talk about STEM. Everything that went into that project, and then the collaboration, their problem solving, they're working together, they're planning, they're measuring
and it's counting, and
yes,
it's like all of the things.
The vocabulary that they learned and we introduced, and it was just, that is the beauty of it. It doesn't take a lot. That nature gives them that natural curiosity and wonderings that they just need the opportunity to explore.
I agree. I think the biggest thing that is give them that opportunity, agree with everything, and then just resist answering the question.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Right? Because that can be sometimes hard. That can be something we have such a desire to give them that next answer by not just solving a problem. You let your child go on this whole adventure to find this stick and all the things that needed to happen. By being welcoming to roly-polies coming in, you created a habitat, right? Which then catalyzed all kinds of new learning, right? Which I love. And likely lots of conversations at all these homes where they would come home and say,
roly-polies,
right?
No,
Right.
no.
But a conversation that perhaps led, a parent and a child to sit down in front of a piece of technology and do some research in hopes that they could come back and advocate, which is great, right? Like, I think you're absolutely right. I think that it's about a mindset shift. It's about you taking, your own interest into it. It's about you not being the barrier, right? And it doesn't need to be expensive. A bag of sand is, I think, $1.50 last time I went to Home Depot. So I think there's lots of ways in which you can foster it. I think there's exciting things that are happening in the community, whether we're talking about the local or the larger things. I want to find out who this partner of yours is who wants to build this, because I would love to help. Yeah. That sounds really cool.
It was exciting that she even think, just thinking big like that.
Did I get his time?
I think,
All right.
I think that takes us in, unless Wayne's got another question for us, but.
No, thank you all very, very, very much for what you do every day and for taking the time to be on this podcast.
Oh, we appreciate you too, Wayne. And as I like to say at the end of our time together to everyone who's watching us on recording, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on nature and STEM? What have you done with your children or your students that has excited them, engaged them? What have we said today that aligns with your beliefs or maybe sparked something new? We want to hear from you, and of course, love to hear about what you're doing. Thank you all for being with us today, tuning in for our talks, and remember to join us every third Thursday of the month to be part of the conversation.